So today we've got a good old Superbike shootout. On my right, we've got the brilliant Pinarello F12 disc, the latest of the F-Series bikes, proven Grand Tour winning machine, straight out of Italy with all the history and glamour that's involved in the Pinarello brand. On my left, it's more of the upstart. Out of Germany, it's Cube with their brand new technical marvel, the C68X SLT. So straight away, we just must say that both of these are absolute thoroughbred superbikes. And what comes with a superbike name? A superbike price tag. These are some seriously expensive machines. Cube, a brand really renowned for having good value. Well, good value you can argue to or fro on a bike that costs £1 under 7,500. With Pinarello, they are a premium brand, and everything that comes with that premium. You're looking at this bike, £10,750. So looking at the Pinarello F12 Dogma disc, you can't talk about that without talking about the F-Series bikes. Pinarello's F-Series bike started with the F8. It won more than 90 races in its first 3 years with Team Sky. And then you move on to the F10, and the F10 won 4 out of 6 Grand Tours. So then when it comes to the F-Series, there's obviously been lots and lots of development that's come through, racing at the very highest levels and being super successful at it. So if we look at the F12, Pinarello have taken 2 years to develop this bike, and they didn't just develop one chassis and then adapt it for a rim brake and adapt it for a disc brake. They were developed side by side, and both to take advantage of the benefits of each system. So we'll start not with the frame, but one of the essential parts to the F12, and that's the cockpit with this new handlebar system. Now this one's called the Talon Ultra. The shape has evolved ever so slightly. It's got a little bit narrower. The front leading edge has got a much more rounded and blunter shape, and everything is fully internal. So that's internal through the bar, through the stem, and down into the frame. So as you can see on the front end, there's no exposed cable at all. So in comparison, if we look at the Cube's front end, now the Cube is much more of a purer aero road machine. If you look at their handlebar system, their cockpit system there, it's called the ICS. It's very much similar to the Talon system. Everything's integrated, all the cable routing runs internally. Looking at that ICS system on the front end, if you look at the stem, it's really thin. Now, that obviously has a big aero benefit, but the other reason that they've done this is it just introduces the ability for that front end just to flex a little bit more. One of the main criticisms you'll find with a big, deep section aero road bike is they can be very firm up front. Cube are getting around that a little bit by slimming everything down at that front end, introducing that ability for it to just move slightly, help reduce the buzz that makes your fingers tingle and gives you cramps in your hands. So if you're looking at the head tube on the C68, the reason it's got so much depth to it there is just so that they can route those hydraulic brake hoses down and alongside the steerer so they don't interfere. Makes it nice and simple, very clean looking at the front end. Also makes it quite easy to disassemble and pack for when you're traveling with your bike. So if we continue out the front end and you look at the Pinarello's fork, now this is the Onda fork. Onda is Italian for wave, and it's an iconic shape that Pinarello introduced back in the noughties, where you get that the fork leg actually sort of sweeps forward and down. So Pinarello claimed that it actually helps reduce vibrations coming through the handlebars when you're riding on coarser road surfaces. In any way, it's just become iconic to the Pinarello brand. Now with this new Onda fork, it's heading up towards the fork crown, what they've actually done is they've broadened it out ever so slightly, and they've sculpted the surface a little bit more. This is all to do with conditioning the air that's hitting the front. It's all about trying to reduce turbulence, make this bike more aerodynamic than the preceding F10. On then just completing the front end on the C68 is that fork. The fork crown, nice and broad, giving it plenty of room, plenty of tyre space in there. So even though this is essentially an aero bike, it's got generous tyre clearances. You could easily get like a 30mm tyre into there. What's actually quite interesting is riding these two bikes back to back. They both achieve a really high level of ride quality. The Pinarello, it's a GC bike, it's a Grand Tour winning machine, but the front end does feel a little bit firmer than the Cube, but where it does have a major advantage is just how well this bike handles. It's so fast, it's so rapid, but it doesn't get twitchy, so it never feels nervous. By comparison, the Cube, the front end of this feels much more compliant, but this feels like a bike that's just so much better at coping with rougher surfaces. It's not a bike to dart through a group and attack or whatever, but for big wide open roads, riding at speed, solo getaways, I think this would be the bike that you'd want. So then if we're moving on to the frames themselves, there's no getting away from, with Pinarello, it's an Italian brand, design led. It's about the aesthetics as well as it is the performance. Now they've done a very, very clever job here of getting loads and loads of technical performance into there while still retaining that iconic Pinarello look. When you drill down into some of the details, like the down tube, you know, you've got this big, deep down tube. It's got that kind of almost camtail shape. That's the airfoil with the rear end cut off to give you that aero advantage. But what they also do is they scallop the inside of the down tube, slightly camber it that way, and that's because when you put a bottle to this and a bottle cage in there, it's actually being well hidden by that down tube. And to work in conjunction with that, they've actually given you 2 positions on the seat tube for the second bottle cage. Here it's set in the highest position, but you put it in that lower position, but your second bottle is actually being hidden from the wind by your first bottle. Again, giving you that little bit of aero advantage. If you take a closer look at the F12 from the rear, you'll notice just how asymmetric this bike is. Asymmetry in a bike frame is something that Pinarello were one of the pioneers of, and it is quite radical how different this bike looks between the drivetrain and the non-drivetrain side, and it's all about just balancing the forces that go through it. Now, it always used to be just about your pedaling forces going through the back end of the bike, and now of course you've introduced a rear disc brake as well, so you've got these 2 different forces both acting on the rear end, so it still needs this asymmetry, but it kind of needs it in a little bit of a different way. Now Cube, with this new Lightning, radical change from the previous Lightning. The previous Lightning was much more of an all-rounder type bike. It was much more in the mold of the F12. The new Lightning has got a little bit more focus. It's a bit more of an aero package in itself, but probably the most important thing from Cube's engineering point of view is to step up to what they call their C68 technology. You know, those letters and numbers don't mean a lot, but it's all about the way in which the bike is actually produced, it's the way it's actually put together. With C68, what they've actually done is they've really gone into closer detail on the actual fibre construction and fibre orientation within the moulds themselves. So if you took a diagonal line from the top of the head tube on this bike down to the rear axle, anything that's below that line, all the fibres are orientated for maximum stiffness. But anything above that line is all about rider comfort. They can orientate the fibres in different ways there to help introduce a little bit more compliance. So when it comes to the back end on the C68 Lightning, if you look at the actual frame itself, it does look very, very much the aero bike. You've got that really, really deep seat tube, the big aero cluster around where it meets the seat post. Compare that, for instance, with the Dogma. You've got that really, really deep seat tube. The seat post is almost a complete continuation of that. You have these smooth, straight lines. Aesthetically, it looks very good. Not that great for comfort reasons, though. So on the Lightning, what they've decided to do is really slim down that seat post. It's still aero shaped, it's still doing the job there, but just being thinner helps it be a little bit more compliant. It means that this, very, very much an aero orientated bike, actually has comfort levels that you don't see on many aero bikes. But now, of course, a superbike isn't just about the frame sets, it's about bikes as a whole, and there are some quite distinct differences between these 2 bikes. First, if we look at the F12, a dedicated seat post obviously for the F12, but it's topped with a new Most Lynx NS saddle. The new Lynx saddle, completely on trend, super short dimensions, it weighs just 150 grams, and it's a real rival to things like the Specialized Power. Moving down the bike, the drivetrain, what can we say about Duro SDI2? Beautiful shifting, great ergonomics, very, very little to fault there. Moving on, Italian flavour again, we've got a Fulcrum wheel set and they're wrapped in Pirelli P0 tyres. However, when we're looking at the Cube, especially when you consider the price, it does seem to offer much, much better value for money. Starting with the saddle, it's a classic physique Antares. It's not one of your modern short saddles, but it's a really nice shape and it's been ever popular since the day it launched. Moving down to the drivetrain, we've got the latest and greatest from SRAM, the new Red Axis ETAP. It's a wireless group, super smooth, simple operation, very, very tunable through an app on your phone. And of course, new Red is 12 speed, so you do get a slightly broader gear range and also closer spacing between it. But it's when we move on to the wheels that you see the relative value. I mean, value is in certain terms, this is still a £7,500 bike, so value is kind of moot. But anyway, we're looking at DT Swiss's awesome ARC 1100 die-cut wheels. This is a wheel that was developed in conjunction with Swisside. Now, Swisside is one of the only wheel builders out there that actually owns their own wind tunnel, so you know this has had a huge amount of aero work going through these wheels. These are super deep section, super aero efficient, tubeless ready, and they're topped with one of the best tubeless tyres around in Superbike's Pro 1. Sadly, the bike doesn't come set up tubeless out the box, so if you are spending this amount of money at your local Cube dealer, I'm pretty sure they're going to convert it to tubeless for you. And if we just talk in pure fiscal terms, these wheels retail at £2,100, and if you think about £2,100 out of a £7,500 bike, that's getting off for 27% of the bike's value is in some really, really good wheels. Compare that with this Pinarello F12, which is running Fulcrum's Wind 40 dBs. Now the Wind 40 dB, I've spent the last few months testing independently of this bike. I had a set into test and I've been really, really impressed with them. You know, they're a 4-star product all the way down the line, but they're a 4-star product for a £1,000 wheel set. It's 10% of the bike's value. So if you put it in direct comparison between the two, value is obviously a moot point when you're talking about bikes at this price, but it's still something that should be considered. And then of course the question that most people are going to be asking about the Pinarello F12 disc frame is how much does it weigh? And it's a very, very light frame, 840 grams. You know, that's impressively light for a modern disc frame. It's impressively light for any frame really. Cube don't actually specify a frame weight as it were, but they do say it's between 900 grams and a kilo. That's very, very light for an aero frame. Obviously not quite as light as the F12, but still very light in its own right. What it all comes down to is which is the best superbike here. It's a really, really difficult comparison to make. There's so much aesthetic glory involved in the Pinarello brand. There's so much history there. There's so much just pure winningness that's going on there. And then you've got the Cube with all of its great German engineering and its efficiencies and everything about it. The ride quality of the Cube is surprising for a bike this aerodynamic. It's so comfortable and it is swift. It's a very, very good bike at covering from point to point quickly. The Pinarello, almost as good at getting between those two distances fast, but it's so nimble, it's so agile. It just feels so alive when you're riding it. The Cube Lightning, so different from the old Lightning. And at a first stab, a real proper aero road bike, Cube have done a tremendous job here because they haven't just chased low drag figures. And bearing in mind, this is 30% faster than the old Lightning in a wind tunnel. They've actually realised that aero bikes are there to be ridden just as any bike are. So they've really concentrated on making it a comfortable proposition too. Taken as a whole, you have to think about Pinarello and their heritage and the design and the aesthetics about it. This is a Ferrari. The Cube, it's German, it's efficient, everything is there for a purpose. This is very much the Porsche. Now, in real world conditions, which is the better? Is it a Ferrari? Is it a Porsche? Porsche is probably a better daily driver, but when it comes to a race situation, you're probably better off on the Ferrari. The choice is yours. It's never going to be my choice. I can't afford either of them. So if you could choose between the two, what would you go for? Would you go for the Pinarello or would you go for the Cube? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe and click on the bell icon, because every time we upload a new video, you'll get a notification.